Hello, and welcome to an Unconventional Guide to Success, where we are exploring concepts and discussing real-life examples showing that the path isn't linear and the journey to success is self-defined. My name is Linda Misegadis.
And I'm Scott Montgomery.
And we will be your guides. This is such an important one, I think, leading into all of the rest of our series and what we're going to be focusing in on, because this is where it all starts.
It really is where it all starts. There's a distinction between partnerships and relationships in the way that I've orchestrated it in the book. Chapter 1 is partnerships. Chapter 2 is relationships. And the primary distinction there is that partnerships were way more personal. Partnerships were really defining for me, Caitlin, my wife Caitlin, and how we play off each other in life and how that role distinction is really important and sort of springboards how we can show up in our other relationships in business, how we can show up in our habits, and how we can support each other in the other chapters that we are going to be discussing here on the podcast. So for me, partnerships is something I really want to get into, but more importantly, I know you know the distinction. So I wanted to ask you, what are you thinking about when I say partnerships? What comes up for you? What do you think about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think for me, it probably comes back to my husband, Jim, who I most certainly do not give nearly enough credit as I should, because he's definitely been the key partner for me. We've been married for 30 years, and it feels like no, it doesn't feel like an eternity, honestly. It's
it's a lifetime.
Maybe some days it does. Yeah, it's definitely been a lifetime. So, I think for me, especially when Jim and I first got married, one of my biggest struggles in life has been around feeling worthwhile, like feeling like I deserved what I had, because growing up in my family, it wasn't always that way. Like my mom and dad kind of had this weird thing about, like, we were almost cursed in some way. It's like, oh, well, that's what happens. It's always this negative glass half empty type of approach. And so through life, as good things started to happen, I was like, gosh, do I really deserve this? Because, we're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. And when I met Jim, at first when we started, he probably appreciated my shy and meek approach then, and he probably regrets helping me along the way, because we always say the monster he has created. But what he really did for me is focused in on telling me and helping coach me that I was good enough, that I deserved more, and giving me the confidence to go in and really ask for things. Because I was one of those people who thought, if you do good things, then good things will happen to you. And while I do wholeheartedly believe, like, throughout my life, I've been a very giving person. And so I do think that, the universe gives back from that respect. But in life, people don't always do the right thing. So, if you're just going to sit and wait for success to happen, or you're going to sit and wait for someone to recognize your talent, you're probably going to just be sitting and waiting. And that's what I had to learn. And Jim was really key to that for me, and in helping me, focus in on the strengths that I brought to the table, and that it was okay to ask for things. That it was okay to go and say, hey, boss, pay attention. Look at these good things that I'm doing. Because I was always very embarrassed to bring any attention to myself. And I think that just stems back from my childhood and kind of shrinking away from any attention I didn't need to. I always used to say, oh, I don't need a ticker tape parade. Just tell me thank you type of thing. But what I realized is that if you don't toot your own horn and you don't bring attention sometimes, people will take advantage, and people will also just not notice. They just won't be paying attention because you're just doing what you're doing. So, I think that was really helpful for me, for sure. And, we've had a lot of ups and downs throughout our life, and we've had our 30 years of marriage has not been easy by any means, but it really showed the strength of exactly what you're talking about, that partnership, because without it, I wouldn't be here today. There's no doubt in my mind that if I wouldn't have met Jim when I did, and we got married and went on this journey together, that I would be here today. I think I would have been in a totally different situation. And I don't know that I'd be very happy either. I think, this has really helped me find that happiness as well. And I know in the book you talk about the kite and the string, and so talk a little bit about that, because you've got an amazing partner yourself.
I do, and it's funny because I think there's a balance that we're both talking about here that needs to be struck. And a lot of our successes and the achievements we have start at home, right?
Yes.
So it's always good for folks, emerging entrepreneurs, young leaders, people that are in that shift to really remember that the home fires are where it can really start for people, right?
I totally agree. Yes.
And it gets sometimes overlooked if you're trying to achieve outside the home, but having that stability inside the home or having it in a partner can really help facilitate security in the relationships you're trying to strive for out in the real world and that social capital you're trying to acquire to create opportunity. Kayla and I have been married 22 years. We were together for 4 years before that. I was a slow roller. I had a bucket list of things that I talk about in the book, if anybody cares to hear
Yeah.
them, read them, that I wanted to get through before I was able to say that I could commit to a relationship and bring my own half of the equation to the table. It would have been a deficit for me to get married sooner. That one unnecessarily Caitlin would have had to carry to get me to where I was feeling more secure with myself. To your point, we all start with these insecurities.
Yeah.
Mine were the opposite of yours. I was very outgoing, very see me, look at me, I'm loud.
What? I
Caitlin,
can't believe that.
yeah, no, I'm loud. Loud. And Caitlin is very much in appreciation of that. But when we came up with when I learned first about the kite and string, it was actually from Caitlin. We were at a charity event with Jack Nicklaus. We were one of the selected few that were able to actually attend his personal happy hour.
Okay.
My father-in-law had donated enough that they had moved to the top of the list of this charity event. And a precursor was to hang out with Jack Nicklaus and his wife, Barbara, to which Caitlin and I took full advantage of. And as we got to know them for this hour-long event, hour-and-a-half event, we learned a lot about how they work in stride with each other. Her and her philanthropic work, how he in his golf and his profession allowed those two things to become one, and part of their strategy for growing their interests in the world and in their own personal success. And as Kayla and I walked away from that, I was salivating over the excitement of having met,
Oh gosh,
the
yeah.
golden bear himself, and also
Yes.
learning that he was human and that he had human stories was also very interesting.
Absolutely.
And lastly, Caitlin was just a little taken back over my excitement in that she said, I sometimes feel like I'm more of a string to your kite and that I hold
Yeah.
you back. And I
Oh,
said to her,
interesting.
yeah, she was very worried about holding me back and that what could I have achieved being loud and gregarious and out there more. And I said to her, I would have never met Jack Nicklaus and I would have never had this thought process if it wasn't for
Yeah.
you and your father-in-law. And the notion of us discussing this only brings us closer together.
Absolutely. That's
And
interesting that she thought that she was holding you back though, because, I wouldn't have
yeah,
thought that, like that's really fascinating.
there comes with my personality and my presentation to the world, the security that's demonstrated isn't always there. It might even
Yeah,
be masking the insecurity.
absolutely. Yep.
And so even my closest confidant wife might have felt like she didn't see that insecurity and that she was holding it back. And really what
I
she was
could see
doing is
that.
complimenting it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because you're
And
right. I think sometimes when you have a big personality and, you are kind of more gregarious and out there, that people just assume that you are, gosh, I wish I could be as confident as Scott. I wish that
right.
I could just do what he does and carry myself the way that he does. And maybe if I was that way, I could accomplish all of these things without really recognizing that there's something deeper going on there as well. And that we just make these assumptions about people and think that there's something that maybe they aren't because we don't take the time to get to know.
Well, and that's the truth. And that is a true. And we'll get into that when we get into our communication styles. I make an effort to now try and read the room a little more effectively as I'm older
Sure.
now. I make an effort to have my body language demonstrate true confidence
Yeah.
versus loud, gregarious, look at me so you don't see me activities.
Right.
Very
Right.
different.
Yeah.
Look at me
It
so you
does
don't
make a
see me
difference.
and so that's what Caitlin was responding to. And so I looked at her and said, how could that even be? That's not even at all where my head was in this. And it was just an
Right.
interesting aha. And it's another reason to have put out the book. It's another reason for us to be talking about it because I think these are important sort of things in the gray that people
Yes.
don't always get a chance to unpack. And it's interesting because once you unpack those, it solidifies the relationship and partnership even more, and greater and bigger things can happen.
Absolutely. Well, and do you wonder sometimes, like I think, how like Jim and I met in the strange. It's always funny when you think about the way that you meet your spouse,
Yeah.
and for us, we met in a bar of all places. You don't generally think you're going to meet your future spouse in a bar, but back when we were younger, that's how you met people was
Right.
was
There's no swipe
you were
right.
out. Yeah,
Swipe right.
exactly. Yeah, it's so much different today. I'm so glad I'm married. It's amazing, but you wonder too, like, is there something inherently that, like, that that's your partner? Because Jim and I are very opposite in so many ways. Like, he's got the bigger personality. He is very strong and assertive in his approach, which was always very uncomfortable to me. Like, it was completely the opposite. But what I found so fascinating about it is that through his strength, I guess, is where maybe I found mine. But what was interesting throughout our relationship, kind of what you were talking about with Caitlin, is that Jim really took the time he said, okay, well, we can't have two big personalities. So someone's going to have to be able to fly. We'll use your kite analogy. And he
Yeah.
allowed me to be the one to fly. And he pulled back, and did not carry forward in his big personality and that sort of stuff, because he felt like he saw something in me and he wanted to give me that opportunity that I never had in life to be that one to fly. So
And I think you nailed it too with, I mean, earlier when you said you just sort of know, right? I think
yeah,
there is a complementary personality to yours. And I feel like that gets tested in courtship, and then
yeah,
it gets reaffirmed and solidifies in marriage, and it's
yes.
a constant affirmation. And it was funny because it was 17 years into our marriage that Caitlin brought this analogy of our relationship to the forefront.
Wow, wow, okay, I didn't realize it was so far in that, I assumed that when you guys met, Jack, maybe it was early in your marriage and
It
trying to
was
figure things out.
5 years. It was 5 years ago.
Wow, wow,
It
that's
was 5 years
crazy.
ago, and it was interesting. It was her analogy, and it was her observation,
Yeah, yeah,
and it was maybe coming from a place of uh, concern that I'm being held back. And
yeah,
I mean, I just can't even fathom where that was even coming from, but it is such
no,
an interesting story to share in the balance of relationships. And like you said, when you
yeah,
just know, people need to pay attention to their heart when they're
yes,
looking at these things, and not necessarily, there's movies about this, there's songs about this, there's books
right.
about this. Um, we don't need to go too far into it, but I thought it was really important that I share. I wouldn't be here, like you said, I wouldn't be here at the capacity I'm here
Yeah.
without the support of my wife.
Absolutely. What she probably didn't view it from the standpoint that she actually provided you that grounding, right? So
Right, right,
because you have a big personality and you are
right.
someone who is constantly like, go, 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 I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, you really kind of do need someone then who can help ground and center you, to create focus, not to hold you back, but to actually create the focus that you need to
Correct.
accomplish those things. Because 17 years in, you had already accomplished a ton of stuff. I mean, it's
Sure.
it's not like, certainly you were not being held back, in the accomplishments that you and Caitlin had together.
Well, and when we talk about the fact that she had joined WorldGate, and that, she had decided that it was also an opportunity for her to take a step back and maybe support our family, and the
Yeah.
decisions we made tactically in partnership really made a difference. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this was literally 5 years ago, and
Yeah.
it was such an aha moment for me to build on, that really the reason I put it in the book is to show people, and again, these young entrepreneurs and these emerging leaders that I want to reach through this kind of dialogue, is pay attention to your home fires. And if you can pay attention to kite string earlier than I discovered it, maybe it'll reap you a different benefit. Whereas I'm gregarious, you're probably more, you needed to be pulled out more by your
Yes,
spouse, and you
exactly.
recognize that, right?
Yeah.
And so that sometimes then formulates what the partnership's going to look like. And Jim's perfectly happy, as is Caitlin. It's like
Yeah.
some people are just made for the presidency or the vice presidency, or they're
Absolutely.
made for the role they want to have in that. And pay attention to that dynamic in your partnerships, because it
Yes.
will drive success in the other chapters we're going to be going over in your fulfillment of those activities and those processes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Jim has definitely been my foundation and my rock. It's who I always come back to. We used to joke.
Mhm.
One time I was in a car accident, and always back then, in our the first call I made was Jim. I didn't call the police or anything. I called Jim, and he'd say,
Right.
I was in a car accident." He said, "Well, did you call the police?" I'm like, "No, I called you." Because that's who I looked to for all of
Sure.
that back then. But it's just kind of funny. You do go back to where your foundation is. But I wanted to ask you something, because one of the things that I find so fascinating about your thought process is that I feel like you view everything opposite. So I was I was looking out to see, like, what does the internet think the difference is between partnerships and relationships? And what's funny to me is that it's the opposite of how you view partnerships and relationships, because in the according to the internet, it says that the instability relationships comes from the opaqueness of feelings, and half the time and energy expelled in a relationship revolves around trying to figure out how the other person feels, and that partnerships aren't about feelings. The feelings have already been established and solidified, and that partnerships are about taking those feelings and proving them every day. If relationships are about finding the feelings, partnerships are about proving how very real they are. And I just find that it's kind of fascinating, because I think that, you view things in an opposite way that most people would. That, when you look at your partnership with Caitlin, other people would say, well, that's not a partnership, that's a relationship. And so it's just fascinating to me, the way that you think through things, which is actually really enlightening and kind of fun. It's cool. It's a different way. You've given me a lot of new perspective on things as we've talked through things together.
Well, and it's funny, it might be dyslexia too, so don't give me too much credit. But I will also say that in the definition of partnerships, solidified, whole, understood, not opaque,
Yeah.
is exactly how I define my wife. I
Right.
understand
Yeah.
exactly where I'm at with my wife.
Yeah.
And I know the feelings I have for my wife, and I know all those things. In relationships, there's still opaqueness, and there has to be a forward openness to trust what the outcomes could be.
Yeah.
And in partnerships, it's funny. And then the second thing I would say to that is unique in the way I process. I typically, if I'm going to be writing something, if you pay attention, this is a little trick I'll give to anybody who's out there. If you're writing and you write a paragraph, I bet you 95% of the time, it's more impactful to rewrite that paragraph starting with the last sentence you ended it with.
Interesting.
And that's sort of a reverse logic, but it never fails me.
Yeah.
If you write a paragraph and at the very end you go, this is what I'm trying to say. If you take that sentence and put it at the top, you just nailed that whole paragraph.
Oh,
And
I
there's
like that.
an interesting sort of thought process that I also find unique. I've learned it in school. A couple teachers have taught it, but it's
Yeah.
not common language. It's not a common language. That's the thing that I feel makes, if you listen to those actions and you get into the gray of that, that's why I wanted to do this podcast. That's why I wanted to write the book. That's why I wanted to spark the interest in thinking differently,
Yeah.
not out in left field somewhere. I'm not creating a new spaceship. I'm just paying attention to the whole painting, you
Yes,
know?
yes,
So,
absolutely. I think that in my 10 years with you, you lead with your heart. You don't always lead. I very rarely see you leading directly with your head. I mean, you might come back to the head, but you definitely lead with the heart. So,
well, I find my best results leading with my heart, and that's actually very nice of you to observe. I would say the same about you, and I struggle sometimes applying head to things that need head applied to them to
yeah,
open up more space for heart even. So it is a
absolutely.
very interesting balance, and some might argue you never need to use your head, always use your heart, and I would argue that's probably true. I'm just not there
It
yet.
probably is. Yeah, there is something to be said for leading with your heart. I totally agree. Well, and that's probably, a good segue into relationships. We hope you enjoyed this episode of An Unconventional Guide to Success. In each episode, Scott and I will share experiences and relationships that have shaped us. Our next episode will focus on the importance of relationships. As Rama S. Sharman says, the business of business is relationships, the business of life is human connection. An Unconventional Guide to Success is an inspirational, motivated series hosted by Scott Montgomery and Linda Misegadis, recorded on Riverside.fm. Music, editing, and production by Logan Misegadis. Check out Scott Montgomery's new book, How Did You Get Here, and all the helpful related materials at www.howdidyougethere.com. At the end of each episode, we would like to leave you with a few questions offered to guide you in your personal exploration of how relationships and experiences are building your success. Take time to reflect and write about what arises. How are you like the kite? How are you like the string? How are you intentional with your partner? When do you intentionally check in with your partner? Thank you for joining us on our journey. If you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is in the show notes.